Welcome to our Endgame lecture class. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. This is my second class in December on Endgame. I want to start with a game I didn't play, so give you guys something good, start you off good. Then we'll go to some of my games, and then we'll finish on a strong note with a game that I didn't play. One thing I like to talk about before the lecture starts is some important ideas in the endgame, which you'll see throughout these games. To me, number one is king position. In the opening and middle game, it's usually a good idea to have a safe king, unless you're my opponent, then you can forget that. And then in the end game, you want your king to walk up the board and do stuff. Now, it's also important to have passed pawns and to queen them, because it's very difficult in the end game to checkmate somebody, but getting a queen is usually easier, then you can checkmate them. And the last is rooks. In the end game, rooks go way up in value. In the opening, your rooks are in the corner, they're doing nothing, sort of like my teenage years. And then, in the end game, your rooks can go on the 7th rank and take everything, and they're awesome. Now, the first time I was ever at the chess club, and I guess things have gone downhill here, but the first time I was at the chess club was in October of 2009. I was a co-commentator at the US Women's Championship. Mike Kummer remembers it well. Me and Jen Shahadi. And well, we were looking at all the games, and they were getting into time trouble, so the moves were fast and furious, with not very furious, but anyway, this was one of the games we were looking at between Iryna Zenyuk and Sabina-Francesca. I believe this was Sabina's first US Women's Championship. She had just started going to school here in the US. And things weren't looking good for Sabina, because black is a pawn down, and black has 4 isolated pawns. White is a pawn ahead and has 0 isolated pawns. And when I was in school, 0 was less than 4. So we just thought white was winning, and the only thing that I said about the position is white will move her king up into the center, and eventually she'll be a pawn up and she'll win. Well, then we stopped looking at the game, and we started looking at the other time trouble games where pieces were flying and people were almost losing on time. And eventually time trouble ended, and we started looking at the game starting from move 40 when the players were thinking. And we went from this position where I thought white was winning to a position where white had to resign, and I was very confused. And I was so confused that I thought maybe my original evaluation was wrong, so I put it on the engine. The engine agreed with me, white is +1 here. Okay, but white did something that if she was my student, she would never do. She made 0 king moves. That's less than the optimal amount. And black made almost all king moves. Black had a really active king, and white was more concerned with winning a pawn or 2. So white played, I guess that's not gonna work. Okay, knight e3 was played. Now it'll work, okay. And white's g pawn is attacked, so white played g3. h5, put it in h. Knight d3, let's skip square for the knight. h4, and then white checked the black king forward. Very suspicious. Okay, not something you should be doing. And white did it again. And white did it again later in the game. But white took a pawn, hooray. Okay, and then white did it again, forcing the king up. Okay, and now white has some issues here. Okay, and well, black's king is pretty strong. Now, I was playing a rook and pawn endgame in the US Championship in 2008 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Ugh. Anyway, so if you live in Tulsa, that's unfortunate. In any case, I was playing Gregory Kaidanov, and I had a rook and a pawn, and he had a rook and 3 pawns, typical when I'm playing Kaidanov. But the game ended in a draw because his king was on h1, and it couldn't get off the h file. And after the game, I said I felt I was lucky to draw, and Kaidanov said, no, I had no king, I was playing without a king. Well, here, white's playing without a king, and even though white's 2 pawns up, white's not only not drawing, white's losing. White's king is in a mating net, and the d4 pawn is stronger than the other pawns. Okay, so she played f5, Zenyuk, trying to make a queen. Rook check, always repeat, good player. And then king e2. The black king goes further down the board, and well, I can see by the look of some of the players in this class, I could say something like, when the king gets to the back, you can promote it, and some of you would believe me. Okay, now, after I'd worked at the chess club for about a year, there were a couple of chess players playing outside, and the tables outside, and they called me outside, and I said, what's the issue? They had a rules question. And they said, is it only a pawn that gets to the end to become a queen, or could anything do that? And the person who didn't know the rule, they were the one who was winning. So the other person, anyway, some people, they may have even been the managers of the club, you never know. But anyway, so here, black actually is not threatening king f1 equals queen. Okay, knight f4 check, because in every instance in this game, when black wants to move her king forward, white sort of insists. Like, yeah, move your king forward, good job. So white's like, okay, black's like, okay. Okay, so this was actually the position that I saw immediately after the starting position of the lecture, because we were looking at other games, and those moves were played. And I couldn't believe that white's king was still on h1, and black had moved your king from f8 to f1. Okay, and white's down a king. Okay, so rook a4, white is very concerned with winning a pawn. And in this position, black has a very good move recommended by me. Okay, and if you don't believe me, turn on your engine, and your engine will recommend it even more. Okay, black actually has mate in 2 here, surprising the onlookers. Black to play and mate in 2. Who can solve it? Yes?
Knight g4.
Knight g4 is correct. Was knight g4 played? No. So knight g4, threatening rook g1 mate with advantage. Now, there's 2 important points in checkmate. One is it's check. That eludes some people. And 2 is there's nowhere to go. There's no way out of check. So obviously, if you check, white's going to play king h2 in this position. So we stop king h2 by playing knight g4. The only defense to rook g1 mate is either knight e2, which allows rook h3 mate, or knight h3, which also allows rook h3 mate. So rook g1, okay, so that game would have ended. Instead, black played rook g4, making white suffer more, threatening rook takes knight, and rook h4 check with eventual mate. Knight h3, d3. And black has a very simple plan. d2, d1 equals queen. White didn't like that plan, so white resigned. Just like Mike Kummer would have done. No. But actually, it's hard to stop d2, d1. Not easy. Why isn't it easy? Because the king is on h1. Now, what I like to tell my students is white didn't make any king moves, but that's actually not true. Black did a repetition, so white played king g1, king h1. Very active. So in the end game, you want to move your king up. And you know, Iryna Zenyuk is a friend of mine, so I hate showing her game over and over again where she left her king on h1. She's even written articles on the end game. But talking about chess like I do and playing chess correctly like chess players do, that's the little difference there. So sometimes in chess, you don't do exactly what you want to do. You're thinking about other things. Then after the game, you realize, why didn't I move my king? It was an end game. Well, now you see what happens when you don't. White basically played the game of king down. White was getting checkmated. Black was making a queen. And white made many, many, many rook moves. And that rook on a4 is not very helpful. Is there a way to go to the next game, or it's impossible? Impossible. Okay. No, lecture's over. Okay. Now the next game is one of my favorites because it's mine. Usually I start complaining about Mike Kummer being here, but Mike Kummer is here. So I have to flip the board, which I don't know how to do. But I don't remember Control F from last time. Okay, so in this position, we have a rook and pawn endgame, which might soon be a king and pawn endgame. Never know. Okay, and in fact, it did become so, because white played the move, rook takes b4, and I recaptured. That seemed like a good idea to take back. Now in this ending, by doing zero analysis, something you're used to, who has the advantage? There's 2 ways to know the answer. 2 things give it away. Anyone? Don't all speak up at once. Anyone? Ben? No. Who has the advantage here, white or black? They each have 6 pawns. Their kings are opposing each other. Yes?
Black, because you're playing black.
Correct. I'm playing black, so that was one way to know that black had the advantage. The other way was, yes?
Black's king is more active.
Black's king is more active. Very good. Those were the 2 answers. Black's king is on the 4th rank, and white's king is on the 3rd rank. Now, another thing that's good, which you probably don't think about often, but now you'll start thinking about it, is in endgames, you always want to make a queen. If you have a pawn ending, and you promote to a queen and they don't, then you're looking good. Then it's no longer a king and pawn endgame. It's some other kind of endgame. It's a queen and pawn ending versus a king and pawn ending. Okay, and therefore, what you'd like to do is look at which pawns are the most advanced. And in this position, there's 2 pawns that are pretty far advanced. The b4 pawn and the e5 pawn. The e5 pawn is probably going to get captured since my king is next to it. Your king's never going to get next to the b4 pawn. So black has an advantage because that b4 pawn is relatively close to queening. Okay, so in this position, white can't really do anything, and he probably thought king e3, king d3, draw. Hooray. And you don't want to take this pawn and let black take on e5, because then black has a passed e pawn and white has no passed pawns. So white played king e3. Now, since it's illegal to play king e4, king d4, king c4, king b4, and king a4, I don't think black's king is going to penetrate unless we do something about that. So what can we do to allow the black king to penetrate white's position? White's going to play king d3, king e3, and it's going to be a draw. So black has to do something. How can black advance? How can he go forward?
C4.
C4, always explosive. Okay? C4. Now, black wants to play c3. However, more important than playing c3 is the fact that white doesn't have any moves. White can't play king d3, king e3 anymore because king d3 is illegal. If you play king f3, now I can infiltrate with king to d4, although I'd probably play c3. Okay, so he traded. Now, black has a very simple winning plan. Hooray! White would prefer if black didn't do that. I'm serious. So what did white do to prevent that? White doesn't want that to happen. Black's going to queen in 6 moves. And white could probably queen on the king side in about 12 moves. You know, take on g5, run the king in there, take the h and g pawns. And by that time, he's already been checkmated. So how do we stop black from playing king c3?
King d2.
King d2, that's what he played. Okay, now, once again, black's king can't get in there. In fact, black's king can never get in there. However, white has abandoned the king side. So after trading, I can go take those king side pawns. Hooray! I'll take on f4, I'll take on e5. White would prefer that that didn't happen, but there's nothing white can do about it now. So white has to get counterplay. White goes and wins the queen side. Okay? And this was all calculated when my opponent traded rooks. I thought this position would occur. Now, if I can get my king to a8, I don't think that pawn's going to queen. That's my opinion. And with the pawns here being connected, that means white can't capture them. If you capture the pawn in front, that would be illegal. If you capture the pawn in back, the pawn in front's going to queen. You can't capture 2 connected pawns. So if you were white, you would probably prefer that black didn't do what I just showed. So what move would you play to stop black from doing that?
King b5.
King where? King b5 does do it. The problem with king b5 is that if we both queen, I queen would check. But king b5 would work. That would stop my king from getting to a8. Instead, he played king c5. Okay. And now I can't stop him from queening. Luckily, he can't stop me from queening. I queen first, because I go first. Okay, and this ain't no movie, so there's no check and take the queen. This is real life. You hear what I'm saying? That's right. Okay, so when we traded rooks, I saw this position, and I said, If I trade queens, I'll win. If I don't trade queens, he'll check me 1,000 times in a row. I would still be in check 24 years later, because a lot of checks. However, I can trade queens by force. I play queen f2 check. I think other checks also work, but this one works the best. King c6 is risky, because then his king and queen are lined up on the diagonal. I don't recommend that. Okay? So he moved his king somewhere else. And now I play queen b2 check, and his king can't go to the a file, because I'll check and trade queens. And his king can't go to c6, because I'll play queen g2 check, winning his queen. So his king has to go here. And irrespective of what square he goes to, I play queen d4 check, queen d5 check, and trade queens. And so here he resigned. I'll play one of them for you. Queen d4 check, queen d5 check. And now I win the king and pawn ending by taking with the king or the pawn. And I'm sure in this position, computer would announce mate, because they see pretty far ahead. They'll say mate in 17. Okay. So after queen b2 check, he resigned. Why did I win that game? Because my king was better than his. I was able to make threats on both sides of the board, and he had to defend. His king wasn't far advanced. When your king is further advanced, king and pawn endings are usually winning, because your king can do something and take your opponent's pawns. Your opponent's king can't take any pawns. Too bad for him. Okay, although I sort of liked it. Okay, the next game was a very interesting ending because it was all tactics. So Mike Kummer's all happy. A lot of endings, there's a lot of finesse, and there's opposition, there's pawn promotion. This is just tactics. Okay, here, black is ahead 2 pieces for a rook. But after the move king to g1, if his rook moves off the f line, I'll play rook f4 check, winning his knight. For example, rook d2, rook f4 check. Knight f5 is illegal and therefore is not possible because it's pinned. So the king has to move, and then I'll play rook takes knight. So he didn't like that. He could also play rook to f5. And if he plays rook to f5, I could play g4 attacking his rook with the same kind of idea. Get your rook off the f line so I can play rook f4 check and win. However, he saw a brilliant tactic. He's the best player in his chair. Okay, now I think what he can do is play bishop to c6. And after bishop c6, white's better, but maybe black can draw if he's lucky, which he won't be, but maybe. Okay, instead, he played rook takes g2 check. This is a mistake. However, it's a really cool mistake. It's the kind of mistake you want to make. Because after I take, you play bishop c6. I don't know if that's a fork or a skewer. Some would say it's both. In fact, I don't think it's a skewer. Maybe it is. The rooks are skewered. Okay, so the rooks are forked, skewered, and pinned. All 3, even if one of them doesn't exist. What do I care? Okay, and it looks like black's going to take a lot of rooks. Okay, however, this loses for him, which is good because I was his opponent. This was played in 1990, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. This position is so bad for black that unlike most people I played, his country no longer exists. They disbanded. He's from the DDR, your favorite country, East Germany. Okay, and we played in Germany. Although I think it was West Germany. Now it's just Germany. So what's the winning move for white? Who can find it? Who's the greatest tactician in their chair? Stop raising your hand at home. I can't see you. Yes?
King f3.
If you play king f3, very reasonable move, I'll take this rook, and then your other rook is pinned. Right? And in Germany, when I asked if that was the right move, they said, "Ish don't think so." King f3 is correct, but it's correct on move 2. Yes?
Rook takes knight.
Rook takes knight check, and then king f3. And you might say, I don't understand who's winning this king and pawn ending. Well, that's good. In the king and pawn ending, you want to have pawns on the outside. In the opening, you want to have pawns on the inside. This is very important for chess. It's an endgame principle. If you have a pawn here and a pawn here, and you're pushing both of them, it's hard for this one piece to stop them. If you're in the middle, it's easy. Now imagine a situation where one guy has a pawn on the outside and one guy has a pawn in the middle, and they take your pawn on the outside and you take their pawn in the middle. Now your king's in the middle, ready to go to either side, and their king is trapped. That's why outside passed pawns are good. He's going to win my rook, and in fact, here he made a mistake. He took my rook, which is, I mean, when I say it's a mistake, every move loses, but okay. And then I won the game without moving. That's how strong I am. How did I do that? And he didn't resign either. They're like, wow, you are pretty good. How do you win without moving? It's your turn to move and your opponent didn't resign. That's correct. I called his time and I won on time. That was move 39. It was move 40. Okay. Now, this move is bad because after king takes, I have a very simple king and pawn endgame. And I'll show you like the basic idea. Or I could play king e3 and lose. It's also possible. Okay. King takes e4. Now the idea is he's going to go this way. And I'm going to go this way. And we'll take all the pawns off, and I'm going to go get that one. If he plays king f7, I'll play h5. He's not going to get over there. And eventually what's going to happen is something like this. And he's not going to be happy that my king is closer than his. Okay? Now, what he should have done is play king f7 instead of bishop takes rook. Also, he should not have lost on time. Also. And now, white only has one winning move. Although I guess after bishop takes rook, I also have one winning move. But pretty easy to find, king takes bishop. What's the one winning move for white? Who can find it? H5, because he wants to play king g6. Okay, and now I'm all set, and now we're going to go back to that winning endgame. Yeah. Okay, so instead of losing this endgame, he played bishop takes, but his time ran out. Unfortunate for him. But remember, outside passed pawn. Now for those of you at home that have databases, or you're watching this video over and over again, showing what kind of life you've led, if you look at the game Andrei Sokolov-Korchnoi from, man, that was a long time ago. I'm going to say 88. I'm going to get some comments in the comment section. You idiot, it was 89, it was 87. Okay. It was around 88, I'm within 2 years. There's a very famous game, Andrei Sokolov-Korchnoi, and I say Andrei Sokolov because Ivan Sokolov is also good. At this time, Andrei Sokolov was the best. Starting about 1994, Ivan Sokolov was better. But they were both in the top 20 in the world. Andrei Sokolov is no longer in the top 20 in the world, although neither is Ivan. And Sokolov lost with a beautiful king. Korchnoi's king was terrible. But Korchnoi had the outside passed pawn. So he won very similar ending with no problem at all. When Sokolov went to get that outside passed pawn, his king was nowhere to be seen. And then Korchnoi made fun of his opponent, as he's apt to do. He's like, this guy's supposed to be a top player, doesn't know king and pawn endgames. So find that game, Andrei Sokolov-Korchnoi, the one that finished in a king and pawn endgame. Korchnoi teased his opponent afterwards. Okay, now some of you think endgames are boring. That's why you're asleep right now. At home, you should wake up, because this will be more exciting. Now, this was a tournament in Antwerp, okay? And of course, when you think of Antwerp, what do you think of? As any small child will tell you, the movie Snatch, okay, with Brad Pitt. No? They robbed the diamond place in Antwerp? Okay. Right, Antwerp's in Belgium, very good. Yeah, nice. Okay, Antwerp is where they have diamonds. If you want to buy somebody a diamond, Antwerp would be a reasonable place. And I'm in Antwerp playing in a chess tournament because I lived in Belgium, as you pointed out. And my brother was visiting me in Belgium. I don't remember why exactly. And this game was played, I guess, as my son was being born. It says 1991. I think it was played in the summer, so my kid was like 1 month old. Okay, and he still shook his head and said, terrible, when he saw this game. Now, around this position, a little earlier, maybe 2 or 3 moves ago, my brother went up to me and said, you know, I want to go like to the zoo or something. And I said, my game's never going to end, so you can go as long as you want and come back in an hour or 2 and I'll still be playing. And he said, okay. And he left and I won in 4 moves. So I had to wait like an hour and 20 minutes for him to come back. No cell phones in those days, so I just waited. And in this position, my opponent decided he would checkmate me, even though I'm in check. I got out of check, I'm pretty good. Okay, and he made the losing move. Possibly black is losing here, but after his next move, he got checkmated. Why did he get checkmated? Because he wanted to checkmate me. When you have endgames with queen and rooks, which we have here, a queen and a rook each, whoever's king is least safe will lose. Passed pawns don't matter, pawn structure doesn't matter, nothing matters. What matters is king safety. Queens and rooks like to checkmate kings. They love it. My opponent played for tricks. What was the problem with that thinking? Mike Kummer.
It didn't lead to checkmate.
No, tricks are for kids. You got to come to more of my lectures. Okay? And he played the amazing move that nobody here would ever play.
H3.
Knight takes b3. With the idea of h3. See, he was thinking ahead. So he was thinking, bishop takes knight, h3 check. I have one legal move. Queen f1 check. That's why he played knight takes b3. So my bishop isn't on c4 anymore. g5 check and mate. So I can't take his knight because I get mated. Okay? So he thought, well, if the guy doesn't take my knight, I just took a pawn. If he does take my knight, I'll mate him. My response to him mating me was I checkmated him. That's a good response, right?
Great.
So I played what move leading to checkmate. Now I like this position because I showed to Dmitry Gurovich, Illinois Grandmaster. I can't take a picture of him because he might be a cop and I would go to jail. No, Illinois, pretty new news story. Anyway, he might be a cop, I don't know. What do I know? So here I showed him this, he looked and looked and looked and he gave up and I showed him the answer and he said, wow, that's great, can I keep this? He wants to show it to his students. And I was like, all right. So how does white checkmate black? Solve the problem the Grandmaster couldn't solve. You, no? Your hand was up a little bit. Yeah?
Queen e5?
Queen e5 threatening. You don't know. I agree. Yeah. So when you were a beginner, what were you taught to look at first before all other moves? They were like, I don't know, I was a beginner a long time ago, I can't remember. Yeah?
All checks.
All checks and all captures. Now his hand goes up again.
Rook h8.
I put it in H. Yep. Now he has one legal move, but he couldn't find it because he resigned. But he could take my rook. And now? He's like, don't ask me the follow-up.
It's queen to d8.
Queen to d8. Now he has two legal moves. If rook g8, queen g8 mate. I could figure that out. And if king h7, queen h4 mate. I hate when that happens. Mike Kummer likes that mate. He's going to do that next time. Right. So after rook h8 check, he resigned. And then my brother left like 10 minutes ago to go to the zoo or something, so I had to wait a long time to him to come back. Okay, in this position, he has to prevent this threat, but he was trying to mate me. So that didn't work out. So that was sort of a nice checkmate. Again, all my nice checkmates were before you were born. I don't play well now, I guess. Okay, now the next thing I want to teach you is something Mike Kummer knows all too well. Never give up. Never stop trying. If you think you're easily winning, you might not win. If you think you're dead lost, keep playing. If it's the deadest draw you ever saw, keep trying to win. Magnus Carlsen would be proud of me, and vice versa. Okay, now this game, black played h takes g4. If you ask me who has the advantage, nobody has the advantage. It's a drawn position. However, the position in front of you right now is also a drawn position. It's equal. If both sides play well, it'll be a draw. That doesn't mean you agree to a draw, you have to fight. So this is pretty drawn, but I keep fighting. Okay, and nothing's happening. And in fact, we traded g-pawns. Okay, and we got this position. That's even more drawn. Rook, knight, and pawn versus rook, bishop, and pawn. Pretty drawn. Okay, nothing's going on. Now in this position, my opponent decided to make moves that possibly weren't the best. And my opponent's rating is very high, over 2,400 USCF. Now here, white has no threat, and white has no material advantage, and white has no winning chances. But I won the game in 3 moves. Because of the next 3 moves, there were 2 blunders. Not so good. So my opponent wanted to make sure it was a draw, and went into the theoretically drawn endgame of rook and bishop versus rook. However, that required my opponent to give away her knight. Not a good idea. So she played knight b4. Not a good move. And this position is a draw, but this is a much harder draw than with the knight on the board. Then my opponent decided to check me forever. Now in this position, rook g1 check is risky because my bishop takes it, right? So I think my opponent thought, haha, now I'll just check forever. And that's what she did. And unfortunately here, she gave 1 check too many. That's what we call time trouble. And then I took it. Bishop, I think she resigned before I took it. Okay, Julian was not impressed. Okay, so in this position, we could just agree to a draw, but instead black sacrificed the knight intentionally and then blundered her rook. She was in time trouble. She wanted to check as much as possible. Knight takes b4 gave her a couple of more checks. So there's no reason to panic when you're in time trouble. Don't give your pieces away. You should keep them. And also, you should always try to win. No matter how losing or drawn it is, you can still win. Right, Julian? See? Backed up. Okay, my last example is the best one because it was not my game. Okay, this is the most famous endgame played in the last 10 years. Who can tell me in the audience what endgame this is? The game of the century endgame. Wow, I never heard of it called that. So the next century is better than the previous one? Because in the 1700s, 1800s, they played great endgames. Fantastic. The endgame of the century in the 1800s was Steinitz winning a really, really easy rook and pawn against Zukertov, making it look impossible. I mean, but he still won. It's amazing. Like rook and 2 against rook. Barely won. Okay. Anyway, in this position, black would like to play king c4, king b3, king d3, king c2, and escort his pawns home. Okay, that's what he wants to do. But it's not easy to get there because if you play the obvious move, king d6, king c5, king c4, after king d6, I can play bishop d4 and stop your king from coming in. And now my king is coming. No. So black didn't want white's king to come over, so black decided to come this way. But some of you, not all of you, some of you may have noticed king e5 is illegal, right? Well, that's okay. If you know the famous Rady problem with the king, my king can go to f5 and e4, and that also takes 2 moves. Some of you noticed king f5 is illegal. Well, if my bishop moves off of f5, you're going to play king f2 and king e3 and stop my king. So Shirov thought of a very unusual way to get his bishop out of the way and then move his king in. And the only person who knows is Mike Kummer. Mike Kummer, are you claiming you've never seen this? Really? Has he seen this? You doubt he's seen this? Wow, this is the most famous. I've already made several videos on this position. And I actually watched this game live, and I assumed that they, that the person, they had a monkey running the spotlight, like play the right move, not the idiotic move you played. But that was the move that was played. Mike Kummer, what is the least likely move for black to play in this position?
Bishop h3.
That's what was played. Double exclam. That's how you get the right answer from Mike Kummer. You've never seen that move? Okay, now it's difficult for white to play king f2, king e3, because then his pawn's hanging. Also, if black plays bishop e4 with the same idea, you can't play king e4 because your bishop's on e4. Some people believe bishop h3 is the only winning move. Maybe. Okay, and Topalov's like, thanks. Man, good bishop. And now the black king walks in. Hooray! Also, by getting rid of the g2 pawn, black has a 3rd passed pawn. So black has 3 passed pawns. I don't think black was too concerned with these pawns. I think giving white an extra h pawn, that didn't really help him. Now, White has a choice. White can say, aha, you can't play king d3, and then black will be like, yeah, but I got a third pass pawn now. So I'm going to play king d3 because your kings have to stop that. Or white can take the s6 pawn and then move his king over, but allow king d3. So he ended up taking the f6 pawn. There's analysis of king e2, a3, d4, f5. Man, that's a lot of passed pawns. I don't think white's doubled h pawns are very good. I think the 3 passed pawns are going to win. So Topalov played bishop f6, d4 threatening a3, which wins immediately, because then you get a queen. So he played bishop to e7, and now king to d3. That's the move that black wanted to play, but his bishop was in the way. Bishop c5. If black plays king c2, then he'll play d3, d2, d1, and white's like, no, you can't play king c2. And black's like, okay, I'll play king c4. Okay, bishop e, obviously, this is the variation they're giving. You know, what kind of move is that? Bishop e7, king b3, threatening a3, a2, a1, if it's black's move. If it's white's move, which it is, white will play the obvious, well, it says bishop c5, that makes no sense. White would play king e2. Bishop c5, what kind of move is that? Okay, hoping for a3, because then we'll take it, and now we'll take it, and now white's pretty happy. So what would black do against the move king to e2? The move they don't have in the analysis for some reason. Anyone? Comer.
King c2.
King c2. Yeah, and now white's really unhappy because this is the threat. And if you put your bishop on b4 and think you can go to a3 and d2 at the same time, you can't. I play d3, and now I push my a pawn. And now you're like, there's too many pawns. I need another dark squared bishop. Then I'm all set. Some other bishop at d4, then we're good. Okay, and obviously if you take, then we make a queen. Or you can promote to a bishop with an easy draw. Either way. Okay. Right, so bishop h3, as Mike Comer said, the least likely move to be played. The only winning move. Maybe the only winning move. It's arguable. But this definitely wins. Because not only does it let black's king get in and saves the tempo, it gives black an extra passed pawn, so white has to defend differently than if he didn't have that passed pawn. What's more important, a bishop or a pawn that's queening? That's a tough question. Okay, but if you have 3 passed pawns and your opponent has 0, you have a chance. You don't necessarily win, but yeah. So bishop h3, obviously you knew that, and that started the Simpsons episode where he said put it in h, even though that episode was much earlier. Maybe Shirov was thinking of that. Put it in h, bishop h3. Yeah, that was a pretty cool move. Now another endgame that's very similar, which you can find on your own time, there's an opposite bishop ending like this one, what Botvinnik was playing. And Botvinnik didn't sacrifice his bishop, he sacrificed all of his pawns to get a passed pawn. So he was like, looked like he wasn't winning, then by sacrificing all of his pawns, he was down a pawn, but he had more passed pawns than his opponent, and his opponent couldn't deal with it. That's another game sort of like this, except he didn't sacrifice a piece. So in bishop and pawn endgames, it's often you sacrifice a piece and you're trying to get a queen, and you could be successful. And if you don't sacrifice your bishop and you don't get passed pawns, you're not going to checkmate somebody with your bishop. You need pawns to become queens to checkmate. In fact, if you're playing on ICC or chess.com or any other website, if you have a king and a bishop and your opponent has 1,000 pieces and their flag falls, it's a draw. But if you have a king and a pawn, then you win, because your pawn can become a queen. And even though you can mate with the bishop, they don't care about that. You don't have mating material yourself, or if they had nothing. Julian's never been so mad. Right, I agree, by the way, but that's me. Yeah. In fact, I was watching a game at the Chicago Open before you were all born, and it was king and bishop versus king, rook, and pawn. And it was a book draw, but it was a book win, then it was a book draw. Then when it got to the book draw, they both had no time, and the guy with the rook and pawn, his time ran out. And the guy with the bishop's like, I win. And then the director said, nope, it's a draw. And in fact, whether you win or draw depends on what rules you're using. USCF rules is one ruling and FIDE's the other, as any arbiter like Mike Cummer could tell you, right? I think in FIDE you win and USCF you lose, or you draw. USCF's like you got a bishop, you don't win. If FIDE's like you could legally win, a bishop could mate a rook, or well, can't mate a rook, but it could mate a pawn. The pawn could become a bishop or a knight, you could mate the guy. You could legally do it. So if FIDE's like, yeah, you win. And the guy was from another country, he's like, I win. And they're like, this is the US, you never win. This is how we rule here. Yeah, even if you mated a guy, it's a draw. Uh-oh, I dropped a rook. Well, I don't drop rooks often, so I guess we better end the lecture. This is Grandmaster Ben Finegold from the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis. I hope you play the endgame better after this lecture, unless you play me. And now for my two favorite words, class dismissed.